What's up guys? So today I'm gonna blow your mind. We're gonna learn how to get the best photos and videos out of your Canon T8i, but also how to set it up so that you have the best user experience with this camera, and all of this in a YouTube tutorial that's actually fun to watch. They said it couldn't be done, but here I am. Let's get into it. By the way, if you're new to the channel, we talk about anything and everything to do with camera gear and teaching you guys how to get the best photos and videos without having to spend a ton of money. So if you like this video, make sure to smash that like button, and we're dropping 2 new videos every week for the rest of the year. So make sure to subscribe and let's get into the video. So the number one tip that I'm gonna give every single person that has a Canon T8i, before we get into the menus or the knobs or any of that stuff, the kit lens that this camera comes with, get rid of it. This camera is honestly too good for this lens. The autofocusing system is actually faster than this lens, and a lot of times I find this lens cannot keep up. If you can afford it, I would highly recommend selling this lens and getting a cheaper used lens, or just simply not buying this camera with the kit lens. Buy the body only and get either the Canon 50mm f1.8 lens, or simply get a cheaper Canon 24mm lens, because those lenses are much faster and honestly look better. But this 18-55 kit lens is not worth the extra money you pay for when you buy this camera, and it's honestly not good enough for this camera. This camera is better than this lens. And next up, let's go over what all the buttons, modes, and dials do on this camera so you know exactly what does what. So let's look at all the modes and dials, starting with the top of the camera. So right here, you see the mode dial. This has the M, T, V, P on it. And I'm gonna quickly explain what each of these dials does. But right here, you'll see this little white mark. Whenever something is lined up to the white mark, that's what mode it's in. So M is for manual. This is where you can change your shutter and aperture independently. It's not changed by the camera at all. AV is aperture priority. They should really just call it AP, but it's AV. TV is shutter priority, and P is program auto. You might be like, this guy does not know what he's talking about. The reason for this is, I never use these modes. These modes are literally the worst. If you're gonna do anything auto where the camera does anything for you, I highly recommend just putting it to A+, which is auto plus. And this is where the camera controls everything from ISO to aperture to shutter. It does all of the magic for you. I highly recommend just putting in that and moving on. But there's also scene. This is where the camera will try to figure out what it's looking at, if it's a portrait, a car, a landscape, and we'll try to change the colors in the camera based on what that is. I actually do not recommend using this mode either, because I'm gonna show you how to get the best colors manually. Next up is the filters effect. This is the 2 little circles. The filter effects are pretty nice. I'm not gonna talk about them in the tutorial because honestly, they're like very kiddie. And honestly, they're really nothing special to write home about. But if you wanna play around with the filter, just flip over this and you get some cool, very cheesy looking effects, if I'm being honest. So for the time being, we're just gonna set the camera to M. This is going to give you the most out of your camera. It's gonna set your camera to get the most potential out of it. And next up, you'll actually see a knob right here. So you'll see off, on, and then a little camera icon. So this is interesting because once you flip it to on, spoiler alert, it actually turns on. But when you flip it to the camera icon, I'm actually just gonna show you guys with this, it's actually gonna go into camera mode. You guys can probably see what my studio looks like. It's not the prettiest environment. See, this part I make look pretty. Everything on that side is just my couch. But basically, if you wanna be shooting photos, you wanna make sure it's in on. If you wanna be shooting videos, you wanna make sure it's to the camera icon. And this is where the SLR shutter actually goes up and it's fully in video mode. And right above that, you'll see the display icon. Now, if you hit that, it will actually say that this function is not available in live view mode. I will explain what that does later, but this is more so to display what your camera sees, or rather what your eye sees when you look through the optical viewfinder. I will go over that later, but for the time being, just know that that button's right there. And then there's the ISO button. If you're not familiar with ISO, it's the sensitivity of your camera. And to change the ISO, you hit the ISO button and this will pop up. And then when this pops up on your menu, you can literally just drag and drop. If you do wanna change it manually, on the back of your camera is a little scroll wheel, so you just scroll around on that wheel. But I mean, you paid for the touchscreen, you got the fancy T8i, so Let's use the touchscreen. Also, it's not 1984. Touchscreens are a thing. Let's get on with it. And last but not least, to the very left of these three buttons is this button with kind of a weird Tetris looking logo. I honestly think Canon needs to do a much better job with their logos, but once you hit this, your autofocusing modes comes up, and this is something I'm gonna talk about later, but this is what's gonna help you activate that. And Canon cameras have some of the best autofocusing modes out there. They're just mwah, chef's kiss. Like, I love the autofocus out of Canon cameras. We'll talk about this later, but I want you guys to know that that button is there. So next, let's talk about how to change your shutter and aperture. This is usually the most complicated part of learning a new camera, so let's get through it, and I promise it's gonna be nice and easy. So right here at the top of your camera, you'll see a little scroll wheel, and if you turn it to the left, your shutter speed will go down, as in you will let more light in. And when you turn it to the right, you will raise your shutter speed and let less light in. And when you wanna change your aperture, you wanna hit the star button right here on the back. It kind of just looks like a pound. Oops, let me make sure this is in frame. You wanna hit this pound key right here with the little star icon, and you wanna turn this to the left, and it will actually lower your aperture. And if you turn it to the right, it will raise your aperture. When you lower your aperture, your aperture will open wider, let in more light. When you lower your aperture, as in make the aperture smaller, it will let in less light. I think that all makes sense. Science. Okay, and next we're gonna talk about something that probably sounds kind of obvious, but I'm gonna explain it anyways, just because I think it can kind of be a confusing thing. So, how do you actually start taking a video or take a photo? So, depending on whether you're in photo mode or video mode, if you're in photo mode, which means your dial is set to on, you just simply hit this button at the front and voila, you take a photo. Pretty easy. But if you're in video mode and you hit that dial, hit that little shutter button, it does absolutely nothing. So if you want to start your video in video mode, you actually have to look at the back of your camera, and you'll see a little camera icon right there next to your optical viewfinder. It's a really small button, and once you hit that, you will start recording a video. And once you hit that, you will stop recording a video. But here's the interesting part. Once you're in photo mode, as in your dial is set to on, and you hit the button that's supposed to start your video, it's actually not gonna start a video. What it'll do is, it will switch how your camera's seeing your image. Either it will show it to you on your touchscreen or through the optical viewfinder. If you hit it again, it will switch back to the optical viewfinder, and all of your settings will appear on your touchscreen. Let me show you guys. Right here, we can see it through the optical viewfinder, the touchscreen. Once I hit it again, now we're back to the optical viewfinder, and all of my settings are on the touchscreen. All right, next, let's get into the fun stuff, the stuff that you actually wanna know, how to get the best photo and video quality out of your camera. I'm gonna teach you right now. So once you've got your camera ready, you wanna make sure you're in the video mode, and it doesn't really matter if you're in the video mode or the photo mode, it's just easier to show you guys with the video mode. So you wanna be in the video mode, and you wanna hit menu, and believe it or not, but your menu comes up when you hit the menu button. Shocking, I know. But once you're in the menu, you wanna go to, you'll see these pages right at the very top. If you hit the dial pad on the back of the camera, go left and right, you'll switch between the pages. If you hit up and down, you can go up and down in the settings. If you go to the very top and then hit left, you'll be able to just skip between these pages. But the first thing we're gonna do is flip between your different menu settings. So you wanna get to the top of this menu, and where it says movie record size, you wanna press the middle of your D-pad, the set button, and it'll open up this menu that shows you all the different video options. So when it comes to the Canon T8i, if you pick 4K, it will actually crop your sensor. And what that basically does is your image will be zoomed in like permanently. I personally do not like this look, and I actually do not think it's as good as what the HD image looks like. So it is my professional opinion that you do not use 4K on this camera specifically. There's other Canon cameras that do it really well. This particular camera, I do not think does it very well. But right next to that, you'll see FHD, which stands for Full HD, and that is 1920 by 1080. That is the resolution that most TVs shoot at, and there you can shoot at 59.94. That is 60 frames per second. If you guys want to do any kind of slow motion, that is the frame rate to use. Otherwise, I recommend using FHD, which is Full HD at 23.98. That is realistic, like what movies are shot at. It's pretty realistic, it's cinematic, and it's beautiful to look at. But if you go one step back, you'll see FHD 29.9 IPB, and then right next to that, IPB light. Now this is full HD at 30 frames per second, so you can slow this down just a little bit, but you have a full HD version and then you have the light version. Personally, there's not too much of a difference, and most of the people using this camera are hobbyists, so you don't need to worry too much about it. For the time being, I just recommend using FHD 29.97. The one thing I want to make sure you guys never do is never go down to just HD, which is 1280 by 720 at 60 frames per second. There is literally no advantage to shooting in this mode other than you're saving a little bit of data, but 720p is subpar. It is like 1998 looking video. I do not recommend shooting in this. I would recommend either sticking to full HD 59.94 or full HD 23.98. And for the occasional people that are shooting documentaries and TV, you've got 29.97, which is 30 frames per second, which is TV. Also, you guys might notice that I'm actually using an external recorder that is $2,000 paired with a $700 camera. I specifically bought this external recorder to take my tutorials to the next level. That is correct, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really out here spending $2,000 just to make my tutorials a little bit better. So, if you could, pretty please, smash that like button, if that's your thing. And while we're on the topic of talking about videos, right below in the same menu where you chose your movie record size, you want to go down to Movie Digital IS. Now, this is an interesting topic. Digital IS is digital image stabilization, where it'll slightly crop in on your image to make your movement smoother. Now, if you are going to be walking around with your camera, I recommend Enable. Enhanced, I feel, crops your image just a little bit too much, and it's not worth the sacrifice. It's not that much better. I recommend keeping this to just Enable, but if you're someone that's not going to be walking around with your camera too much and you're relatively good at keeping your hand steady, I honestly recommend disabling this. That little bit of crop sacrifice is not worth that little bit of smoothness, especially if you have this on a gimbal or it's just sitting down for a talking head scenario like this. So this is something that's going to depend on your individual case usage. Big words for me. But I recommend usually keeping this disabled. And next up, let's talk about how to get the best photos out of your camera. So once you're in photo mode, it is important that you are in photo mode. Otherwise, you will not be able to see these specific menus. So once you're in photo mode, in page 1, you'll see image quality. So you want to hit the set button, go into the image quality menu. And to get through this menu, it's kind of tricky. If you move your scroll wheel to the left, you will be able to play with the RAW settings. And if you move the D-pad to the right, you'll be able to play with your JPEG settings. Now, you might be like, River, what is JPEG and what is RAW? RAW is basically the raw, like there's really no better way to put it, is like all of the data that your camera sees and you throw none of it away. There's like a codec or a file type that the camera puts all of it into and you are throwing nothing away. And generally these are pretty big files. I mean, again, it's the modern era, so there may be about 50 megabytes, which is not that big in today's day and age. But I remember a time where 8 gigabytes was like the maximum you could get in your computer. So nowadays, if you're someone that wants to do a lot of editing with your photos, you really want to make sure you get every last little bit of quality out of your camera, I highly recommend shooting RAW or compressed RAW. There's no quality loss. It's just that once your camera compresses that RAW file, you'll have a smaller file size, but you'll need a slightly more powerful computer to unpack that compression and be able to use it. Again, for most people, even if you have a MacBook Air, your computer is going to handle it just fine. But I recommend just shooting RAW, so just in case your computer isn't powerful enough, it's not extra struggling to deal with that compression. Now, a lot of people like to get pretentious and say they only shoot RAW, and I actually remember getting a really nice comment where someone said, finally, a guy that's not pretentious and is okay with JPEG, and I completely stand by that comment, only because I like the love you guys give me, but in all seriousness, if you're not shooting professional work, you do not need RAW. I know a ton of photographers that actually shoot JPEG because they're like, dude, I know what I'm getting in camera. So again, if you're someone that's not too serious about editing their photos, you're just a hobbyist or just like an everyday person, shooting JPEG is perfectly fine, but I do recommend shooting large JPEG with the little curve icon next to it. This way you're getting the most out of that JPEG, and going with a small, medium or small JPEG is really not worth the trade-off for the saved space. I highly recommend shooting a maximum JPEG. As you guys can see at the very top, if I'm only shooting JPEG, I'm shooting 3,000 JPEGs. That's more than enough. I don't even shoot 3,000 photos in a year. But, there's one caveat. If you're someone that's shooting RAW, I highly recommend shooting RAW and then small JPEGs for clients or medium JPEGs for clients where you can handle the RAW, but you're able to, especially if you're a wedding photographer or someone that's working with clients regularly, you can keep the RAW and just send the medium JPEGs over to your clients. They won't be able to do something like not pay you and then just use your medium JPEGs to like print your work out and use it for commercial use. JPEG's not that good, but this way you can share exactly what you shot to your client, get pretty good colors right out of the camera, and this way, you and your client are on the same page. By the way, if you're watching this video, chances are you just bought your first camera and you're just getting into photography and video. If you want to learn how to get the most out of your camera and really squeeze every drop of potential from your pretty expensive $800 camera, I highly recommend checking out the link down below. Down below, you'll find the Camera Boost course that is specifically tailor-made for people that are just getting into photos and videos, whether you want to be a professional or you're just doing this for fun. But this course is going to show you how to get every last drop of potential out of your camera and literally make your $500 camera perform like a $5,000 camera, and that is not an exaggeration. I've been working in the camera industry for many, many years, and I'm going to show you every last insider secret that I know to make your camera perform its best. If this sounds like you, I highly recommend checking out the course down below. Not only is it going to save you time, but also money, because you will not have to buy a bunch of fancy gear that you really didn't need to pay for. Alright guys, so next up, I'm going to show you two very important things: autofocus mode and drive mode. Drive mode dictates how fast your camera is shooting photos, and this is really important if you want your camera to be firing fast for sports photography or people running around. If you're doing any kind of action, you have to learn how drive modes work, and it's pretty easy. Okay, so once you're in photo mode, you want to go to your D-pad and literally hit the left side. You'll see a little photo icon right here. Again, Canon needs to do a better job with their logos, but you'll be in the drive mode menu. So drive mode has a bunch of different modes: single shooting, high speed continuous, and low speed continuous. Now this camera really does about 7.5 frames per second. So I actually don't recommend most people shoot in high speed continuous unless you're shooting something super fast like a basketball game or people running. If you're just filming a little bit of action around like a wedding or a party, low speed continuous should be fine, because I don't want you guys to overshoot and have way more photos than you need. So high speed continuous if you're shooting a lot of fast action, and other than that, most people should be fine with low speed continuous. But for shooting portraits, people that aren't moving, again, single shooting, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. And right here at the very end, you'll see self-timer continuous. Now this is kind of confusing, but it's pretty straightforward. You basically pick self-timer continuous and you pick how many photos you want it to take. So for example, you pick 2, and once you select it, you're good to go. It will still make you wait the full 10 seconds when you go into this mode. There's no way to have a shorter runtime, but it will take the amount of photos that you selected. And next, let's talk about autofocus modes. In video and photo, it works slightly different. So once you're in photo mode, you want to hit the right side of your D-pad where it says AF, which stands for autofocus, and you'll get 3 options. There's one shot, AI focus, and AI servo. Now, AI servo is the best version to use. AI focus isn't quite as good, and they're really just doing the same thing, but different versions of it. If you're sitting down for a portrait shot, I would recommend going with one shot, because this is actually going to give you slightly better frame rate for your photos. But for someone that's doing a lot of action, I would go with AI servo. And if you want to change autofocus in video mode, it's slightly different. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a button right here up at the top. If you hit that, your focus modes come on. And if you keep hitting that, you'll switch to different focus modes. So when it comes to video, you have face tracking, which is what I recommend most people use, because most people are going to be shooting people. And next to that is spot AF. This is where it just takes whatever's in the middle of your frame, and it will just try to get that in focus. Next to that is 1 point AF. This is where you'll actually be able to pick different points on your image. As you can see, I can move this little box around with the D-pad, and it will just focus on this. This is better for product photography, or if you're trying to shoot something more intricate. And right next to that is Zone AF, where it will literally just take the middle part of your frame. You can again move this zone around, but 1 is basically a small box. Zone AF is a bigger box and it kind of takes a zone, if you will. And and that's pretty much it. Those are your 4 modes. And for most people, again, I recommend using face tracking. But one nifty thing that you can do with face tracking is when you hit face tracking, you can either hit the info button or just tap on the screen and you can get into different modes with face tracking. So if I hit info right here, you'll actually notice that the little icon right there goes from face to eye. So what that actually does is it allows you to change between either face tracking or specifically tracking people's eye. Both of them work equally well. I don't really think there's too much of a difference between them. Again, if there is a difference, it's negligible, and for the everyday user, they will not even care or notice. So I know I said that the average user will not care or notice, but you know who does care and notice when you guys smash that like button? Me. That is all. Let's get back into the video. So the last thing that I want to show you guys is how to set up your custom color profile. Now, colors are so important when it comes to photography and video, specifically with video, because with a camera like this, you really don't have that much room to perfect your colors in post-production. So I'm going to show you how to get the best colors possible right in camera for both photos and video. But if you're shooting photos, I really recommend you shooting raw and doing it in post-production. And so again, we go back into the main menu, hit the menu button, and once we're in this, you want to go down to page 4. And right here, you'll see picture style. Now I've already kind of set something up, but let's hit the middle button, go in there, and you'll see a bunch of different profiles. What I recommend doing is going to user defined. Now you can set up different picture profiles for yourself, but going to user defined, you want to hit the info button to get into that. And right at the top where it says picture style, you want to click into that and pick neutral. Now that's already going to give you a very flat looking image. And this is really best for video. So once you're in there, you want to go down to sharpness. And again, as you can see, I have mine turned down all the way to 0, but in case you don't, you just hit the middle button and you'll get to this menu, and you just want to crank that all the way to 0. Again, contrast, you want to hit the middle button and crank that all the way down to -2. Some people like -3. Play around with what you feel is best, but in my professional opinion, that is backed by Harvard studies, it's really not, but I recommend -2. -3 just looks a little too bland. But saturation, you want to go down and you want to pick -2 for this as well. Pretty simple. And the one thing you want to make sure you never do is you never touch color tone. Color tone is literally going to start changing the hues of your colors. And unless you really know what you're doing with this, just leave it at 0. Colors look great. But that's pretty much it. If you do this, you will get a much flatter and better picture profile right out of your camera. And if you do want to finesse the colors a little bit in your editing software, you will have that option to you. But if you're someone that's like, hey man, I do not want to edit, I just want the best colors out of my camera, what I recommend doing is going back to this and actually just keeping your profile to auto, because believe it or not, even when it comes to the entry-level Canon cameras, they do such a good job with colors. Anytime someone's like, I want a camera that looks good and I don't want to have to do too much work, Canon all day, every day, all year, I don't know. But just set it to auto and you will get good colors right out of the bat, because the camera will just instinctively select for you because it kind of knows what you're looking at. It can see a lot of greens, it can see a lot of blues, and it's like, I know what to do with this. Well guys, that's pretty much it. I hope I kept my promise to you guys, and I actually did make the first ever YouTube tutorial that was fun to watch. If this was fun and you guys want me to make more of these, leave me a comment down below. Something as simple as, that was fun, make more. Thank you, cheers. Let me know, I will make more. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button. And if you want to see more, because you left a comment down below, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.